everyone, and welcome to this week's learning webinar. My name is Chantel, and today we're going to discuss decks. We're going to look at flat patio stone areas. We're going to be looking at raised decks and multi-level decks as well. Following the presentation, I'll open up the chat panel so you can type in any questions that you might have about decks. And then following the entire presentation, I'll email you out a booklet so you can read about all of the different subjects that we covered today and do step-by-step procedures so that you can try it out yourself. So let's get started and talking about decks. So on the home that I have on my screen today, we're going to add in a flat patio area at the front door and then a multi-level deck out the back. When I'm putting in any kind of decks, I always recommend that you do it in a 2D view. When you're in a 2D view, you have the precision of picking the exact points where you want to put them. When you're in a 3D view, you've got the depth perception that you're dealing with. Am I picking to the outside face of the wall and picking the correct points? So I always suggest, especially when you're laying something out, to do it out in 2D. So I'm going to flip this back to a 2D view, and I'm going to use the zoom window tool down here and holding down my left mouse button and magnify the area around the front door. So around this area, I want to put in a flat stone patio area, and I can do it in two different ways, and I'll show you both. The first one is going to the terrain tab, and underneath the terrain tab, you'll see a tool called pads. When I click on the pads tool, the catalog panel to the right will update and show me different choices that are part of our default catalog. So in there, we'll see different concrete pads and different masonry pads. And I would simply pick on the one that I want to use. Once I have it selected, I just move my cursor onto the drawing screen area, and I show it where I want to start picking that pad. It's going to be, for my case, a rectangle, so it's going to be 4 points. I'm picking the 4 corners of the patio area. So here's my first corner, left click, move to my second corner, left click. Then when I'm coming down for this corner, I want to line it up with this corner of the house over here. So I want to make sure that my snap track is on, because I'm going to move my cursor and just hover it over top of the corner that I want to line it up with. When I do that, just hovering it, I'm not left clicking over there, you'll notice that there's a line that appears across my screen. It's showing me how I can be lined up with that point. So I want to make sure that I keep with that point. I'm bringing my cursor back, and you can see it's coming down 8 feet, left click, and then bring it over to my very last corner, left click. When you're creating an element with the pad tool, it's creating a polygon shape. So because it's creating a polygon shape, I don't have to go back and pick my original start point. It automatically returns itself back to the start point. So once I pick those 4 points, I'm done. I simply right click and tell it that I'm finished. It will automatically put in the 6-inch brick pad. When I left click to select that inserted pad, you'll notice that it has grip points all the way around it. That's those little blue squares. The ones in the middle of an edge of the pad will allow me to stretch that entire edge up or down as I want to. The ones that are hollow and appear at each of the corners allow me to take just that one corner and stretch it off somewhere where I'd like it to go. So you can modify the shape of the existing pad that you put in those 2 different methods. Stretching out an entire edge by hovering your cursor over the solid blue squares on the edges that appear. And as you hold down your left mouse button, you can stretch them away. Or putting your cursor over top of one of the clear corner grip points, and by holding down my left mouse button and bringing it to a new point, I'm stretching just that one corner away. If I take a look at that out in 3D, out at my entrance point here, we can see that it's put the pad in. I'm going to double click on that pad to bring up information about it. This pad itself knows that it's 6 inches thick, and it gets its thickness here under the properties. It also knows that it hugs the terrain. So if my terrain is to slope or it moves down, then it knows that it's going to hug it and keep up with that and move this pad. Instead of keeping it nice and flat and level, it's going to slope it down as well. Um, I can change that thickness of that pad to be anything that I want. So if I wanted it to be 8 inches, and I could change the name of it up here as well to be an 8-inch brick pad, click OK. You can see that it makes it even a thicker pad. I'm going to delete out that pad. That's as much information with it. But if I go back to my building tab, we also have the floors tool. The floors tool does basically the same thing. I can do a floor by picking points, and I can tell it that I want a slab, and I want it to be an 8-inch concrete floor slab. And then doing the exact same thing, picking points by picking out these corners that I've chosen to do. Now I can either do the same thing and hover my cursor to do that spot, or as I'm moving my cursor down, I could type the 8 feet for my next length for that third corner, and then pick my fourth corner, right click, finish. Same procedure, and if I pick the floor, you can see that the floor itself has the same type of grip points. The difference between putting it in as a floor and putting it in as a pad under the terrain tab. A floor surface can be elevated. So if we need it to reside anywhere other than sitting right directly at grade, if I wanted it to be elevated up 6 inches or down, or maybe up on a patio that's up in the air, I can't do that using the terrain pad tool. I can do that with the floor tool and insert a slab. So depending on how you want it to look, if you want it to be a pad because you want it to match the terrain and it's sloping, you can do that. Or if you want it to be elevated up, then use the concrete floor slab using the floor tool under the building tab, and then choose elevate and tell it you want it to go up 6 inches. Apply OK. And then if I do a front entranceway, you can see that it's elevated off of grade here. So either way, you can achieve different results, but it's still giving you that slab that you want. It's just depending on where you want it to be sitting in relation to grade. Okay, I'm going to put this back down into a 2D view, use this Zoom Previous tool so I can see my entire model again. And then I'm going to go out to the backyard. So I'm going to zoom out extents here and use Zoom Window so I can put in a big deck along the back edge of my house. To do that, I'm going to go to the Landscape tab. And under the Landscape tab, I'm going to select on the Decks tool. Under Decks, I choose Decks. The catalog panel to the right of the screen, again, is going to update. And it's going to give me choices that are found in our default, and I'm using Envisioneer 13 catalog that I can see. So I've got ground level construction, low level construction, and raised level construction. And to kind of profile the difference between the choices here, if I look at the ground level construction and look at the little preview here, you can see that the deck is sitting directly on the concrete sonotubes. If I look at the low-level construction deck example, you can see that the deck is sitting on posts, which are sitting on concrete sonotubes. And then if I look at the raised level construction, you can see that it then wraps around a deck railing automatically around it. So we've just put in those different options so that you can quickly go and find one that best matches how you're going to be building at that time. So I'm going to use the low-level composite deck for the back of my home at this point. So I move my cursor onto the drawing screen. And again, just like I was doing the pads and the floor, I'm picking points to show it where each corner of this deck is going to reside. So I'm moving my cursor down to the first corner of the home, left click. I'm going to go all the way over to the other side, left click, move my cursor out to show it my third point. And at this point, as I move that third point out, you can see the diagonal line connecting it to that very first point. This again is a polygon shape that it's automatically creating, so I don't have to pick my very first point again. It automatically connects it for me. As I'm moving my cursor back, I could just left click to show it where I want that next point, But looking at the bottom of my screen, you'll also see distance and direction. You'll notice that the distance box has a highlight of blue around the number value. That means that it's current. So I don't have to move my cursor down into that distance box. I could simply just type. I just typed 10 feet. And it knows that I want the distance to be 10 feet. My cursor is moving up towards the top of my screen, which is the 90-degree direction. So I can simply hit enter, and that point, my third point, would have been 10 feet away from the last point I picked in the 90-degree direction. If I then pull my cursor to the left of the screen, looking down at the bottom of the screen again, you can see that my direction is now 180 degrees. And I can again type in a distance. So if I wanted it to be again 10 feet, I just type it and hit enter. So I put my fourth point 10 feet away from that third point, going 180. I'm pointing up again. I can type 5 feet, hit enter, and it's a 5-foot distance for that next point. You can see it there, away from the last point, in 90-degree direction. And then I'm going to move my cursor back over to the left, that 180-degree direction, and I'm going to use Snap Track. So I'm going to hover my cursor over my original start point that I had, and as I'm moving that up away from the screen, I'm going to left-click to accept it, right-click, and hit Finish. When I finish drawing out and specking out the corners of that deck, you'll notice that the original line of the deck up against the house doesn't have a row of columns or beams. Because I started my start points, I'm just going to zoom in a little closer here. My original start points when I was drawing that deck were right inside the stud wall, right in here. There was my first point, here was my second point. Because I was drawing inside the stud wall, it indicated to Envisioneer that I wanted to adhere that deck right to the house. I was going to leg it in and use a ledger board. It saw that I was picking within the stud wall. If I had picked to the outside face, so if I had picked out here to the outside face of stone in the case of my model, then it knows that I would want it not to leg into the house, that I was simply picking outside of it, and I want a row of columns and beams right away because it was going to be an independent structure and I wasn't legging it into the house. So you can use that strategically. If you know you're going to be legging the deck right into the house, pick inside the stud wall. It'll automatically give you a ledger board. You can see that blue line going right up against the face of the house, and it will leg it right in. If I rip this off and go to the outside edge, you'd notice a row of columns and beams being placed right up against the side here. So you can have two different levels of construction there based on where you're even picking. Okay, so I'm going to double click on the deck right now and bring up the information about the deck so you can see all of the materials that are associated to the deck and how they're specified and laid out. So the first information, by double clicking on the deck and bringing up its dialog box of information, is the support information. What is the height above the current location of that deck? So when I'm looking at the current location, it's looking down here at my ground floor location, and it's saying what's the difference between the height of your ground floor floors and this deck. So right now, with it being 0 inches, the deck is absolutely flush with the floors inside the home. So if I wanted that deck to sit down a little bit, I could say it's negative 6 inches. If I wanted to lower it down and have a step down from the house to the deck. So this is the value, the distance between the floor in the house to the top level of the deck. This B value, depth below grade, is right here. When I'm putting the footings in for the deck itself, how far below grade are they going? And if they're not, that could be a 0 value if you wanted them to just sit right on top of grade. Am I including a post? My post right here in the little diagram over to the right are 4x4 wood posts, and they're sitting on top of 12-inch mono footings. If I wanted either one of those to change, I would just click on this select button associated to either one, and they would automatically take me into the catalog where I could specify a different element. So just hitting there takes me into the catalog, and I can say, well, instead of 4x4 wood posts, we really need 6x6. And it would update them automatically, even in my preview of that deck. If I didn't want the post or I didn't want footings, I could uncheck either value here, and they would automatically disappear. The next tab here is the frame tab. And when we're looking at the frame tab, it's wondering what materials you're specifying, the spacing, and the general construction method as well. So if we look at construction to begin with, we have 3 different ways that we recognize decks are built. Beam on post, beam flush, beam to post side. And if I just flip this deck up here, and I'm going to put it in a rendered outline view so we can see it a little bit better. When you're in any of the dialog boxes in Envisioneer and you have the preview, if you want to change the look of that preview, you simply move your cursor into this preview area and you right click. So if you rather see it as a 2D diagram or as a rendered outline in 3D, you can do that as well. So just changing the view allows you to see it in a different way that might make more sense to you depending on what the object is. So right now we have beam on post. If I change it to beam flush, you can see the change, and beam to post side, you can see the change as well. So we recognize either one of those, and that's how it's going to distribute the materials that it's being used. And the materials that it's using for that deck are below. So in the decking, I'm using 1x6 composite decking. And again, if I hit select here, it'll take me into a catalog where I could choose any different materials. The materials themselves, they get their look from the properties of it. So this composite decking, if I edit it, it will have an appearance tab, and it will have a material associated to it. It's always coming up with new composite decking colors. And if you want to incorporate those into your designs, you can import those new materials. So where I have this chocolate brown composite decking, I could right click here and say, I need to add a new material. They're coming up with a new battleship gray or a different color. And I could come in and say, this is the new material that I'm coming up with. And the material type has all of these settings set to it, and material usages. So you can change the actual material from either being a color or an actual texture. And when it's a texture, that means you've downloaded a JPEG or a bitmap, right, maybe from your manufacturer's website. So it looks exactly like that composite decking. And when you bring that in and click OK, that will add that new color right into your catalog. So you could take advantage of that when you're wanting to show new materials and new textures related to the deck itself. When I have that 1x6 decking, it wants to know the spacing of it. So I've got a 1/4 inch spacing between the deck boards. And if I want to overhang them, I can overhang them a certain distance as well. I've got that set to 0, so they're being clipped right at the edge of our deck. The joists underneath are 2x8 treated boards. But again, going out here will allow you take you to the members catalog. And in the members catalog, we can choose any material that we want. So if you wanted those to be 2x10s, 2x12s, 2x4s, you could choose any of those. It doesn't do any structural analysis. So buyer beware on that. You want to span some 2x2s, 20 feet. You can do it in the software, but you really shouldn't be doing that, obviously, in real life purposes. So make sure you're always aware of the choices that you're making in here. So my joists are spaced 16 inches on center, and they overhang the beam by 16 inches, you can see here. The beams themselves are 2x8s, and their spacing is 10 feet apart. So every 10 feet, I'm going to get a row of beams, and then the columns underneath to support them. and their overhang is 1 foot as well. If I want to add in any accessories to the deck, then I go to this last tab. And accessories can be railings on top of the deck or skirting below. So if I define a railing above the deck, I'll choose cedar railing with a bottom rail and click OK. It'll automatically wrap itself around the deck. You'll notice, and you can see this in this little preview here and out in our model, these little red circles on the edge of the deck. And out here, right in the model, you can see them as well. Those allow you to define if you want railing or skirting to maybe be taken away from that one side. So if I click OK here, and we look out in a 3D view at the backyard deck, we can see it all the way put in. You'll see each side has railing, except the one up against the house. That's another strategic advantage of picking inside the stud wall. It recognizes that my first 2 points were inside the wall, and I therefore wouldn't need a railing at all. But if I pick on the deck itself, you can see the edges. And in 2D, when I'm looking at it and pick on the deck, you can see these red circles. So if I zoom out here just a bit and maybe pick on this edge right here, for whatever reason on this one side of the deck, we don't want to see railing or skirting. And I click OK and take that off. If I look at a 3D view, looking down at that edge, you can see it's ripped off. There's no railing or skirting along that edge. So if you want railing around the majority, but only certain areas taken off, take advantage of those circles to make sure you're ripping off the edges where you really don't need it. When we do have the deck inserted and we have the railing up, we can then proceed to put in deck stairs. And when we're putting in stairs, same as putting in the deck itself, the catalog panel to the right updates and shows you different options you have for the deck. And these, again, are just catalog options we've put in to get you started. If you know you wanted 6 feet wide or 8 feet wide stairs, you can always right-click here in the catalog and add those elements in. So I'm going to say Add Element, and we can change information. I'm going to say I want an 8 foot wide pressure-treated deck stair. I'm going to extend it down to the terrain. So if my terrain level changes, my deck stairs will get shorter or longer. My maximum riser height is 7 inches. So when it is extending down to the terrain, it knows that it'll need to add more and more risers, because I can only go to a maximum height of 7 inches per riser before I need to increase the length of the stair and get more risers put in. The overall width, I'm going to change that to 8 feet. And my tread run is going to be 11¼ inches. So I'm using a 2 by 12. I'm putting railing on both sides. The railing specifications itself come directly from the deck. So whatever railing I put on the deck, when I include railing on the deck stairs, it uses that same deck railing and extends it down the stairs. If I look at the Details tab, it gives me 3 different ways I can have my stringer. So if I want it notched, or if I want to put the stringer right underneath the stair steps themselves, or if I want to run them sideways, I can. What's the spacing of my stringers, the height of them, and the overall width. And if I want a closed riser, so you can see right here, they're open risers, I can check here and select a material for that as well. So I could tell it that I want to use 2 by 6 decking to close in the deck risers. Okay, and use the tread as well. It does the same thing, going out and checking it. So any of these can be changed. So if I know my stringers right now, because I've got an 8 foot wide stair, and I've only got a spacing of 16 inches, that's why you're seeing so many stringers. So I'm going to change that and say that they're 4 feet apart. So I've only got 1 in the middle. Okay, and then I can click OK, and now that becomes a new catalog item. And if I move my cursor onto my model and up against the edge of a deck where I want it to appear, and left click, it'll automatically put in that stair. And if I take a look at that, wrong 3D view, backyard decks, we can see the stair going down and the handrail following along with it. Okay, so lots of different options to check and change with your deck. I'm going to put this again back into a 2D view, and I'm going to change my location. This time I'm going to choose my second floor location. I'm going to put in just a little Juliet balcony coming off of this patio area on my second floor. So I'm going to zoom in on it and go back to use my deck tool. I'm going to tell it that I'm going to be using a composite raised level construction. And for it, I'm going to pick to the outside edge of my material here. I'm not going to try to lag into the house. I want it to be an independent structure to show you the difference. So I'm going to left click on the outside edge. As I move my cursor one way or the other, I can type in the distances that I want to have. So I can pick any distance that I want it to adhere to. So when I'm picking those distances, I'm telling it how far I want to bring over that next point, or I can just point and click on my screen as well. So you've got choices there of where you're going to be picking and dragging those points. So my next point, I'm just going to left click to select it, and then I'm going to move out. And as I'm moving my cursor outward, I can type in a distance just like I was before. So I could type in that I only want to go out 5 feet this time. In my distance box, I'll just pick in there, 5 feet, hit enter, and then come back out and line it up with my original start point. Left click, right click, finish. There's my deck, independent structure being put in. You can see the rows of columns there. If I look at that out in a 3D view, you can see that it extended down the posts all the way around. Because it is an independent structure, I get that railing along the back edge. So in 2D, I'm going to want to do a few things. One, I'm going to remove railing and skirting by picking on that red circle, unchecking railing and skirting, and clicking OK. And two, I'm going to look at the spacing of my posts and my beams that I have going on in my structure. So my beam spacing, I've got every 10 feet, but it recognizes that I'm up against the house. It wants to put one in, and I've got one up against here as well on the other side. It doesn't want to just give me one because I would be not lagging to the house. So that's why I've got the two. So it's automatically going to put in a couple for me. If I wanted to change the spacing of those, because I'm underneath the spacing right now, I've only got 10 feet and I've only got a 5-foot deck. That's why it's going to give me both. Because it recognizes that I'm close to the edges, I need to stay to that. I can change my overhang values if I want to be even closer to the edges with these beams as well. Okay, so I'm looking again out on my backyard decks, and there's my Juliet balcony being supported. If I didn't want to see the posts, if I did want to lag into the house, I do a couple things. One, when I was picking the deck, I would pick right inside the home, or I could say, don't include the posts and the footings, and then it just becomes a little Juliet balcony coming off the top. Lots of options available in using our deck tool, our deck stairs tool, using under the terrain tab, the pad tool that we used for the front of the home, and also under the building tab, we also used the floor by picking points tool to define the front patio as well. What I'd like to do is make sure that I leave enough time today for your individual questions that you might have about decks and pads and patios. The GoToMeeting console at the right of your screen allows you to type in questions that you might have about today's subject matter decks, and I'll be able to answer those live. I always recommend taking advantage of this time, this question and answer time, because it's your way of seeing a live answer. You also have access to our technical support center. So if you are working on a deck project and you have a question about layout or materials that is being used, never hesitate to contact them as well. You can email it into support@cadsoft.com, your questions, even include your Envisioneer model so they can open it up on their end and see exactly what you're attempting to do, and they can give you some guidance along the way. So let's look at your individual questions that you might have about decks. Oh, and there doesn't seem to be any today. So I'm going to leave that chat panel open for another moment, just in case someone's typing in their question right now, and I'll leave time to answer those. But if there isn't any questions in the next minute or so, I will end off the presentation. And when I do end off the presentation, I do record each session each week, and you can find a copy of this webinar up in our archive. It just takes about 24 hours for me to process it for you. But if you go to cadsoft.com, so if I show you our website right now, and you wondered where is the archived videos, I want to be able to see past presentations. If you go to www.cadsoft.com, over to the right, you'll see our little hamburger menu, and in there you'll see Learning Center. If you go to the Learning Center, the Learning Center will bring up our training site as well, and you'll be able to bring up our calendar. So if I click here and go to Events and Training, on our Events and Training page, it'll show you all the different types of training that we do offer. And at the bottom of that page is our calendar, where you can register for each class each week. Here's our deck webinar class that you already signed up for today, and next week is on remodel design. When we look at the archive down here in the lower right-hand corner that's red, if I click on that, it directly takes you to our archive. And by clicking on any of these listed topics, it'll take you directly to the corresponding YouTube video on that subject. So you can watch the past presentations on foundations and columns and beams and lumber and rendering and kitchen design, so you can learn a little bit about those subjects as well. We present those each week, so you can see the live broadcast every Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern, or watch the past presentations here. So let me go back and see if we have any questions, and if not, we will end off today's presentation. And just thank you, but other than that, no questions today. So that tells me that everybody really understands decks and you're designing some great decks out there. If not, don't hesitate to contact us. Send your models into support, and we can help you along with those and make sure that you're designing perfect decks for your clients. I want to thank everybody for joining me today during your busy timetables. I know it's not always easy to make it at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, but I do appreciate your time, and I hope you learned a little bit this week about decks. And I look forward to working with you again next week for remodel design. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Bye-bye.